that what would happen if the next great war, the one capable of shaking the foundations of the modern world, already was written in ancient prophecies. What if, in front of our own eyes, words millennial will begin to come to life across armies, borders, and prayers? In South Asia, two nations, they walk a fine line of tension. India and Pakistan, separated by more than territory, divided by beliefs that cross generations. On one side, millions. They raise their offerings to the gods ancestral, seeking strength and protection in traditions millennial. From the other, voices rise in prayer, reciting surahs that invoke the justice and the promised victory. This conflict is not simply political. It vibrates in the deepest roots of the identity of these peoples. It is a confrontation of faith, of worldviews that for centuries have dreamed with the spiritual supremacy. But what if all this was barely the surface? What if this rivalry was in reality the manifestation of a conflict announced in sacred texts, a warning that now begins to be fulfilled? Today, we will explore the mysteries that connect the religion, war, and forgotten prophecies, because perhaps the real battlefield is not the disputed land, but the very soul of the humanity. Since its birth as nations' independence in 1947, India and Pakistan have been protagonists of a story marked by the resentment, the distrust, and the pain. The partition of the Empire British let wounds open, families separated, communities torn apart, memories bathed in blood. It was not treated simply from a new delimitation of territories. It was the fracture of a spiritual fabric that had coexisted, although in tension, for centuries. Hindus, Muslims, and Sikhs, who once shared roads, markets, and festivals, were suddenly transformed into enemies. Since then, the clashes have not ceased. 3 formal wars, countless skirmishes, and a persistent conflict over the Kashmir region, a land where the mountains, they seem to guard secrets too old to be ignored. In recent years, tensions have reached alarming levels. Recent reports indicate massive troop deployments along the line of control, the unofficial border dividing Kashmir. Intermittent bombings, downing of aircraft, and accusations of terrorism keep alive the fear of a new large-scale confrontation. Both nations possess nuclear weapons. A spark, a miscalculation, a misinterpreted provocation, and the whole world could witness a tragedy of unimaginable proportions. But what many do not understand is that behind the coldness of figures and diplomatic treaties, something much deeper beats. A force invisible that pushes these nations toward the abyss, a tension that cannot be resolved only with politics or treaties, because it arises from the deepest part of the human spirit. In every sentence whispered in Hindu temples and at every night prayer in the mosques Pakistanis, there is a hope of victory, yes, but also a silent anticipation of an inevitable fate. While political leaders exchange veiled threats and the military machinery is activated in the shadows, a question begins to emerge. Is it possible that this conflict has been predicted long before they existed, the modern nations? To understand the depth of the rivalry between India and Pakistan, it is necessary to look beyond the flags and the armies. The real origin of this tension is found in something much older: the faith. The partition of 1947 was not just a geographical division, it was the separation of 2 sacred worldviews. On the one hand, the India Sea, with his immense, most Hindu, bearer of traditions that revere a pantheon of gods and a cyclical worldview time. From the other, Pakistan, conceived as a shelter for the Muslims of the subcontinent, adhering to the monotheistic faith of Islam, with his linear vision of the history and its belief in He Day of the Judgment. These differences are not merely theological, they are forces that shape cultures, identities, and collective destinies. In the India, the Hinduism permeates every aspect of daily life, from the laws until the public celebrations. In Pakistan, Islam is not just a religion, it is the cornerstone of the nation's same. Every skirmish, every gesture of defiance, every act of violence carries with it centuries of accumulated resentment and deeply held religious convictions. Is not only a fight for land, but by the spiritual validation of an identity. Kashmir, the epicenter of conflict, becomes a sacred symbol for both sides. For many Hindus, represents a lost jewel of ancient Bharat. For the Muslims, is a territory whose liberation is a religious duty. National narratives are imbued with spiritual heroism. Each martyr is celebrated as a divine envoy. Each military victory is interpreted as a blessing from the heavens. Thus, the confrontation is not only fought in the battlefields or in the trading rooms, but in the hearts of millions. Every child who grows up in these lands inherits, consciously or unconsciously, the weight of an ancestral mission to defend the faith, protect the inheritance, fulfill destiny. But amidst this fervor, a disturbing question arises. What if this confrontation were not a human choice, but a piece within a broader design, a conflict inscribed in the invisible lines of the ancient prophecies? Throughout the centuries, in the sacred books and in the traditions of forgotten sages, have been tissue warnings about a time of darkness and global conflict. Wars that would be born in the heart of ancient civilizations, where the faith and power would be intertwined in a way inseparable. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus, he warned his disciples, "You will hear of wars and rumors of wars. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom." Matthew 24:6-7. Words spoken 2,000 years ago that are still spoken today resonate with a disturbing familiarity in the conflict between India and Pakistan. And it's not just in the tradition Christian where these signs appear. In Islam, there is the prophecy of the Malhama al-Kubra, the great final war that will precede the day of the judgment. According to some hadith, this war will be so devastating that the whole world will be drawn into a spiral of violence before the dawn of a new divine order. Some scholars point out that Hindu scriptures also, they speak of a cycle of destruction and rebirth, where apocalyptic wars, such as those described in the Mahabharata, mark the end of an era and the beginning of another. Is it possible, then, that the growing antagonism between India and Pakistan is not a simple accident of the history, but part of a prophetic convergence? Every military movement, every act of violence, every word of hate that crosses the borders could be seen as a piece of a puzzle a lot greater, one that transcends political agendas and reaches the domains of the spiritual. While diplomacy attempts to sustain a fragile peace, others perceive signs of forces invisible are in movement, guiding the nations toward an inevitable climax. Forces that were described ago millennia with a disturbing clarity. Maybe we are not simply observing a conflict between two countries. Perhaps we are witnessing the materialization of ancient warnings. Echoes of the past that now become an urgent call to wake up, to look beyond the obvious, to understand that the human history, from its beginning, has also been a story of prophecies seeking to be fulfilled. When we look at the events unfolding between India and Pakistan through the eyes of the ancient scriptures, the panorama takes on a dimension much deeper and more disturbing. The words of the prophets, of the wise men and mystics, seem to outline a repeating pattern: tensions between nations, wars driven by ideologies, catastrophes that precede transformations global. They are not mere coincidences, but pieces of a tapestry woven from the beginning of the times. In Revelation, John describes a rider on a red horse, symbol of war, who is granted the power to take peace from the land, so that the men kill each other. This image, so vivid and timeless, resonates in every artillery shot, in every detonation that shakes the mountains of Kashmir. The prophecies Islamic. They talk about a time when the land Muslims would be besieged, battles would multiply, and the alliances would change like sands dragged by the wind. Today, in the complex network of alliances and tensions that surrounds the South Asia, these ancient visions find a disturbing echo. Even Hindu scriptures, in texts like the Vishnu Purana, mention a Kali Yuga, the age of discord and the conflict, where the violence will be currency current and the rectitude a rarity. For many believers, we are living fully within this cycle. The current one, the scenario, is not just political or military, it is deeply spiritual. Every decision taken by leaders, every provocation, every act of resistance is perceived by some as the acceleration of a prophesied destiny. As if the humanity unconsciously was following a script written long before its own birth. But the scriptures also, they offer more than just warnings. They offer paths of redemption. They speak of those who, in times of darkness, they choose act with wisdom, compassion and truth, of those who recognize the signs not to give in to fear, but to prepare spiritually for what is to come. Perhaps, more than fearing the compliance with the prophecies, we should ask ourselves, what role will we play when the veils of the history finally fall? When two nations so marked by the history, the faith and the pain, are faced with the edge of the abyss, it is not just a geopolitical conflict. It is a crossroads for the entire humanity. War, if it breaks out, would not be limited to the borders of India and Pakistan. The shockwaves would reach unthinkable corners, altering the global balance and dragging old ones with it, alliances, new enmities, and perhaps irreversible change in our way of conceiving the future. But beyond from the noise of weapons and the thunder of hate speech, there is a silent call, a call that resonates in the words of the prophets, in the visions of the wise men, in the whispers from ancient scriptures. That call invites us not to fear, but to understand. It reminds us that even in half out of chaos, there is a purpose, that each generation faces its own evening dark, but also possesses the possibility of being the light that breaks the shadow. Maybe we are witnessing the beginning of a long-announced cycle. Perhaps still, let's have time to choose between the path of the violence and that of the wisdom, among the blindness of the revenge and the vision of the transcendence. History, after all, is not written only by the powerful. It is sculpted by the decisions of millions who, in silence, choose every day between fear and the hope. Today, more than ever, the question resonates. Will we be mere spectators of the compliance with the prophecies, or protagonists of a greater awakening? If this story has touched you, thought-provoking, subscribe to the channel. Share this video with who seek to understand the hidden mysteries of our time, and leave us your comment. Do you think we are living the beginning of a prophesied time? Or even there is paths, unwritten things that we can explore? Your voice is also part of this story.